What happened tonight, man?
A little bitch boy came in and tried to push my boy right after he's done fighting.
You want a shot at mayhem?
The fans have loved the older Diaz brother since the early 2000s, even before he made his UFC debut, and that's because Nick never played the fighting game. He just fought. Whoever, whenever, however. The man has been a warrior all of his life. But warriors make enemies. Lots of them. With dozens and dozens of fights under his belt and years of celebrating 420 every day, it's easy for Nick to forget lots of guys he fought. But not all. There are some fighters that will stick with Nick for the rest of his life, for all the wrong reasons. Here are 5 fighters Nick Diaz couldn't stand. In the 5th spot, the man behind Nick's first possible on-camera feud, and that's Karo Parisyan. You want to know when Nick Diaz really started hating people on camera? It all goes back to Karo. This was the early 2000s. Both guys were still young and coming up in a new-look UFC. They were supposed to fight at UFC 44, but then Karo pulled out with an injury. Diaz didn't buy it for a second. He basically called Karo a liar right there in the media, saying he knew Karo was scared of the pressure. You gotta remember, Diaz never had a filter. The minute Karo pulled out, the trash talk started. It was never just business for Nick. He took it personally, and he let everyone know. The trash talk only got louder after the fight fell through. Diaz kept calling Karo out in interviews, convinced that Parisyan didn't want any part of him. Karo never backed down either, taking shots of his own and making it clear he had no respect for Nick's attitude. It felt like the two of them might throw hands anywhere, whether the cameras were rolling or not. DanaWhite saw the tension and made the fight official for UFC 49. What started as a regular matchup had turned into one of the first real grudges of Nick's career, and everyone around the sport could see it coming. When the cage closed at UFC 49, you could see both guys wanted to settle everything that had built up over the past year. Karo stuck to his strengths, taking Diaz down with clean judo throws and staying glued to him for most of each round. Diaz tried to shift the momentum with elbows, triangles, and whatever offense he could find off his back, but Karo stayed heavy and just kept grinding. The action never slowed, but the judges sided with Karo's control. All 3 gave him the win. After the fight, Parisyan used his moment on the mic to call himself the better man and said he handled Nick in every area. Diaz wanted none of it. He refused to shake hands and walked away frustrated. Nick thought that Karo had only survived by holding position, so he left the cage visibly frustrated, feeling robbed by the judges and fed up with the way Karo fought. That frustration stuck with him long after the event. Of course, in usual Diaz brothers fashion, the anger toward Parisyan didn't fade after the bout. And as it happens with the Stockton brothers, when one Diaz has a problem with someone, you can bet that the other one has a problem with them too. Years after the Nick Diaz fight, Karo would find himself in the middle of more Diaz drama, this time with Nate. During the filming of The Ultimate Fighter Season 5, Karo dropped by the house to see the new crop of lightweights and immediately started roughhousing with Nate Diaz. Karo played it off like he was just having fun, but his tone rubbed everyone the wrong way. He kept reminding Nate who he was and treated him like a kid who should know his place.
When he's here, the way he acts towards people, he's not very respectful, you know?
Nate called him out for it on camera, saying Karo wasn't showing respect and acted like he was above everyone there. The tension built fast.
Are you still gonna fight me? Yeah. Huh?
Yeah.
Off camera, Nate told the crew he was ready to swing on Karo if he took it any further.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Serious?
You're the one looking at me on serious.
Nothing broke out that day, but the message was clear. Whatever beef started with Nick was now family business.
I'm trying to have no conversation with that dude. I don't even like him, bro.
After that, the Diaz brothers made it obvious they weren't letting go of the Parisian grudge. Karo's own career faded, and as he slipped out of the UFC picture, the Diaz brothers kept climbing. While neither Nate or Nick met Karo in the cage ever again, our story doesn't here. And fortunately, it ends on a high note. A few years ago, Karo told fans at a seminar that he and the Diaz brothers were on good terms, and that Manny Gamburian and Ronda Rousey helped everyone squash the old tension. Whether or not it's all friendly now, that stretch of bad blood set the tone for how the Diaz brothers handled anyone who crossed them. From a relatively forgotten MMA legend to one of the GOATs, in the 4th spot, we have Anderson Silva. While both Silva and Diaz were forces to be reckoned with in their primes, they unfortunately met at a different point in their careers. At UFC 183 back in January 2015, Silva was making his long-awaited return after snapping his leg, and Diaz was back from another suspension. The UFC sold the fight as a super fight, but for Nick, it was more than just another payday or big-name dance partner. He felt like the promotion was using his reputation to prop Silva back up, and he never hid his frustration about it. In the lead-up, Diaz didn't do much of the usual trash talk, but he made it clear he wasn't there for circus act. He told the press he respected Silva's skills, called him a real striker, but wasn't interested in playing the underdog.
You know, maybe I can make something happen for myself. We'll see, you know.
What bothered Nick the most was the way media and fans painted him as some kind of sideshow, while Silva was handed the hero's welcome. Diaz said it straight, he came to fight, not to boost Silva's brand.
Why are you mad, bro? Because you're full of shit and everybody knows it?
Before the fight, Diaz said Silva wouldn't stand and trade, and warned everyone he wasn't there for games. He kept repeating that he came to fight, not act like a prop for Silva's comeback story. Diaz looked at the matchup and saw the UFC putting Silva's reputation ahead of his own. Respect was everything to Nick, and he felt ignored in every part of the promotion. When the cage door shut at UFC 183, Diaz wasted no time setting the tone. In the first 2 rounds, he tried every trick in the book to bait Silva into a real fight, lying flat on his back, putting his hands behind his head, and yelling for Silva to stop running.
What is that right now?
Diaz wanted a war, but Silva kept his distance, fighting behind a careful jab and backing up whenever Nick pressed forward. The striking numbers leaned towards Silva, who landed cleaner shots, especially with his leg kicks and quick counters. But Diaz controlled the center of the cage and never stopped walking Silva down. For 5 rounds, Silva circled away and picked his moments, while Diaz never stopped moving forward and calling him out. The crowd split right down the middle. Some believe Silva was playing it safe after breaking his leg the year before. Others felt Diaz wasn't doing enough to sway the judges. When the scores were announced, every judge had it for Silva, all by wide margins. 49, 46, 50, 45, and 50, 45. Diaz pushed back on the decision right away, saying the fans were booing because he deserved the win.
I'm kind of tired of being a loser, you know?
The debate didn't end there. Analysts and fans kept arguing about the scorecards for weeks, with a few even giving Diaz 2 rounds. Nick's team stood firm, saying Silva only did what he had to do to get by, and never stepped up to finish the fight. Days after the fight, news broke that Silva had tested positive for steroids. He had both drostanolone and androsterone detected in his system.
Anderson Silva tested positive in his post-fight.
Diaz also failed his post-fight test, but his was for marijuana, something he had been flagged for before. The commission threw the book at both fighters. Silva's win was changed to a no contest, but Diaz took the brunt of the punishment. He was handed a 5-year suspension, much harsher than what Silva received, and he didn't hold back when asked about it. Diaz called the penalty retaliation, said it made no sense, and questioned why marijuana carried a heavier punishment than performance enhancers.
I know all the fighters, and they're all on steroids.
He argued that if Silva had banned substances in his system, he should have been disqualified on the spot. Diaz summed it up later in an interview. "If I'm dirty, then he's filthy." The fallout never sat right with him. He never forgave the judges, the commission, or Silva for staying quiet about the controversy. While the 2 fighters are cordial nowadays, saying hi to one another in events, it doesn't seem like Nate respects Silva to this day. Anderson Silva isn't the only fighter Nick would continue to have problems with years after they fought. That's why Georges St. Pierre is 3rd on our list. For years, Diaz chased a shot at GSP, taking every opportunity to call him out and accuse him of dodging the fight. Nick told anyone who would listen that GSP was protected by the UFC and that he'd pulled out of fights just to avoid a real test.
If this guy was down to fight me, but I don't think he's down to fight me, you know?
This guy being GSP.
Yeah.
Every time the matchup fell through, Diaz got louder and the frustration kept building. When the title fight finally landed at UFC 158, Diaz wasted no time going after GSP's character, calling him pampered, entitled, and not real. He didn't appreciate GSP calling him a bully, nor mentioning over and over again how he got bullied as a kid.
I remind him of the bullies that picked on him growing up or they had to deal with.
Diaz said most of the fighters got bullied and attacked as kids, and that helped them build character.
And you know what? Without that, I might not be who I am today.
In the weeks before the event, Diaz skipped media obligations, nearly getting himself pulled from the card. Every press conference turned into a circus. Nick rambled and mocked GSP, always circling back to his favorite topic, and that's respect. The UFC saw an opportunity and hyped the matchup as pure bad blood. By fight week, everyone knew it wasn't just about the belt. This one was personal, at least for Nick. The fight itself was exactly what you'd expect after a week of Diaz antics. In the hotel lobby, Nick was mean-mugging, dropping steroid accusations, and trying to stir up anything he could. He even got his camp to complain about GSP's hand wraps before the commission taped them up. By the time they hit the stage for final interviews, GSP looked flat out annoyed, barely hiding how tired he was of the trash talk and the constant attempts to get under his skin.
Kara, you think I'm afraid of you, man? Are you crazy in your head, man?
When the lights went down in Montreal, GSP looked locked in. He bounced in his corner, just like always, and shot for a takedown seconds after the bell. Diaz tried to pull off his usual guard attacks and work for submissions, but GSP's wrestling never let him get close. Every time Diaz found an angle, GSP shut it down and kept him stuck on the mat. On the feet, St. Pierre picked his moments, landing sharp jabs and kicks, and picked up damage on Diaz's face without ever giving him an opening for a brawl. Nick kept the trash talk going, but the biggest moment of attitude came right after the third round when Diaz flicked a punch at GSP after the bell. Even DanaWhite said he should have lost a point for it. For all 5 rounds, Diaz had no answer for the takedowns. GSP set the pace, set the positions, and never lost control of a single moment. When the cards were read, it was 50-45 on every scorecard, and nobody argued with the result. GSP complimented Diaz in the post-fight interview, saying Nick was tougher mentally than anyone he'd ever fought. Diaz admitted in the press conference that GSP gave him the credit he deserved, but couldn't help taking shots about the decision, GSP's style, and the scoring.
I want a rematch. I think I can beat you. That's what I think.
He called GSP's performance safe and boring, and went back to accusing him of stalling for points instead of fighting to finish.
I guess we're back into where we were.
Not long after, Diaz began spinning stories in interviews about GSP being greased, using shady hand wraps, or possibly having IVs or tainted supplements. Diaz and his camp kept bringing up these claims for years. The stories became a running joke in MMA circles and were even laughed about by GSP on the Joe Rogan podcast. The grudge didn't fade. Diaz never gave GSP full credit and, even years later, was still searching for a reason to explain the loss. He claimed poisoning, cheating, and commission favoritism. GSP never got dragged into the drama. On podcasts, he'd laugh about the stories and remind people he beat Diaz clean. Like most of the other beefs here, it grew colder year by year, and nowadays the two are seemingly cool with each other. They even shaked hands when they saw each other in a locker room after a fight. But knowing Nick Diaz, it's hard to say if he completely forgot the beef. But if you want to see what happens when a grudge never ends, look no further than the chaos that followed Mayhem Miller every time his path crossed with Nick. This rivalry didn't start with trash talk or fight hype. It started with one of the wildest scenes in MMA history. April 2010, Strikeforce was on live TV for the first time in company history, and Jake Shields had just beaten Dan Henderson.
First time they were on mainstream television.
They let Mayhem in the damn cage.
As Shields was giving his post-fight interview, Mayhem Miller crashed the cage out of nowhere, demanding a rematch and grabbing the mic.
Beat that first round.
What's up? Where's my rematch?
That was all it took. Nick and Nate Diaz, along with the rest of the Cesar Gracie crew, saw it as pure disrespect. What happened next turned into must-see TV for all the wrong reasons. The Diaz brothers jumped Miller right there in the cage. Punches and stomps flew while security and officials tried to break it up. The broadcast didn't cut away. As a matter of fact, every second aired on CBS. And after it was done, the commentator got on the mic and said possibly the worst thing you can say.
Sometimes these things happen in MMA,
making the entire situation seem like it's a normal occurrence in the sport. By the time the officials cleared the cage, the damage was done. The brawl instantly killed Strikeforce's run on network TV, with CBS dropping MMA broadcasts altogether. The fallout came fast. The Tennessee Commission handed out fines and suspensions to nearly everyone involved, including Miller. Mayhem went on to say it was a 5-on-1 ambush and used every interview to remind people how he got jumped.
I just wanted to ask for a rematch. I wasn't trying to get in a big brawl.
Nick Diaz never apologized or backed down from what happened. For him, that night was business as usual. Handle disrespect, stalked in style. The brawl in Nashville wasn't the end of it. If anything, it kept the tension simmering for months. Just a few shows later at Strikeforce Houston, Nick and Mayhem nearly went at it again. Miller threw a bottle in Diaz's direction backstage, and security had to keep them apart. Miller kept blaming Nick for starting everything and told reporters he never felt safe with the Diaz crew around. Instead of letting things go, Miller leaned into the beef. He made fun of Diaz's "Don't be scared, homie" line and even put it on a t-shirt. Every chance he got, he took shots at Nick in interviews, calling him out and poking fun at the Stockton attitude.
They don't understand English. They're from Stockton.
Diaz, on the other hand, didn't took the bait. He never mentioned Miller by name again, acting like Mayhem didn't exist. There was real talk about booking a fight between them, but it never happened. Each time Miller tried to make it happen, Diaz just froze him out, staying silent or walking away. Even UFC President DanaWhite would later say that he wasn't surprised by the brawl at all.
Fight breaks out next to the Diaz brothers. What do you think's going to happen? Okay?
He also would go on to say that the brawl with Mayhem was one of the reasons the company kept Diaz on the sidelines for a while. At that point, the rivalry seemed unfinished business that never got settled in the cage, but things change. As the years rolled by, the rivalry faded from both the headlines, people's consciousness, and from Jason's and Nick's mind. Sure, Nick threw shots here and there at Mayhem when asked about him.
Jason's an asshole.
But these seemed like friendly jabs and not comments made out of frustration. Mayhem even extended an olive branch to Nick. In 2023, after news broke about Nick Diaz struggling with canceled fights and personal issues, Miller took a different tone.
You know, we had our beef, whatever, since we were kids, but that...
He went public with concern for Nick, saying that even after everything, he'd help Diaz if he ever needed it.
That doesn't stop me from extending a helping hand.
Mayhem talked openly about the toll fighting takes on everyone in the sport, and pointed out how hard it can be for anyone to keep it together after a long career in MMA. Sliding into the #1 spot, we have the only fighter Diaz ever battled twice in one night. And that fighter, ladies and gentlemen, is Joe Riggs. UFC 57 didn't have any wild build-up or personal shots before Fight Night. Nick Diaz and Joe Riggs were just two welterweights with a job to do, sharing the undercard and looking for a win. What nobody expected was that this fight would set off one of the most infamous stories in MMA history. The bout itself went the distance. Diaz stayed active, landing more strikes over 3 rounds, but Riggs scored with takedowns and controlled the positions that mattered. When the final bell rang, all 3 judges saw it for Riggs. That's where things started to go sideways.
28, Joe Riggs.
After the fight, Riggs didn't hold back. He mocked Diaz in the media, later telling people Nick hits like a girl. For Diaz, who was already furious with the decision, that was too much. He argued with the judges and officials backstage, calling out what he saw as terrible scoring. Diaz claimed Riggs just stalled and did nothing, and the only reason he lost was because the judges didn't know what they were watching. Right after the decision, Riggs wasted no time letting Diaz know how he felt. He went to the media and made a point of saying Nick didn't have any power and couldn't hurt him. That dug in deep. Diaz was already frustrated, and hearing Riggs brush off his performance only made things worse. Backstage, Diaz let his anger show. He argued with the judges and accused them of not seeing what actually happened in the cage. Nick told reporters that Riggs just played it safe, stayed out of danger, and won over the officials with control instead of real fighting. Instead of letting it drop, Diaz kept talking about the score and the way Riggs acted after the fight, which made the whole thing extra personal. The situation would only become crazier from here, and no one was ready for it. What happened after UFC 57 is the kind of story you couldn't make up if you tried. Both Diaz and Riggs were sent to Valley Hospital in Las Vegas, dealing with the usual fight night injuries. The two ended up in rooms right next to each other. According to Diaz, it didn't take long before Riggs made his way over and started mouthing off again, picking up where they left off in the arena. Diaz got out of bed and confronted him. The trash talk quickly turned into a full-blown fist fight right there in the emergency room. Punches landed, and the scuffle kept going until security and hospital staff rushed in to pull them apart. Both fighters had to be restrained to stop the chaos. Nobody got arrested, but the story got out fast. Reporters confirmed the fight through multiple sources, and Diaz later told BJ.com that he beat his ass again inside the hospital. Riggs would later back up the story in his own interviews, admitting the brawl really happened. The UFC never punished either man, but the incident became one of the most bizarre and talked about moments in MMA history. No one else has ever followed up a fight in the octagon by throwing down again in the ER. This hospital brawl is still the only one of its kind. The chaos at Valley Hospital turned their story into MMA legend, but the UFC never gave fans the rematch they wanted. Diaz went on record again and again, saying he was ready to settle things officially in the cage, but the fight never got booked. Riggs, meanwhile, dealt with injuries and personal battles that took his career in a different direction. Even when Riggs managed to return to the UFC for a short run in 2014, the rematch stayed off the table. Diaz never softened his stance, didn't wish Riggs well, didn't offer any respect for his comeback, and barely mentioned him at all unless the hospital fight came up. In one interview, Diaz shrugged off the idea of running it back, saying, "I already beat him twice. Why would I fight him again?" That hospital fight stuck with both of them for years. Riggs called it the wildest moment of his career, and he never forgot how quickly things got out of hand. There was no handshake, no attempt to settle things, and no rematch booked. The story ended the same way it started, with both men heading in different directions and the bad blood left hanging. For Diaz, Riggs was the opponent who proved that grudges in this sport can last long after the final bell. You'll hardly find anyone Nick hated more than Joe Riggs. Well, maybe DanaWhite at moments, and the Nevada State Commission, and, well, yeah, you get the idea. Nick Diaz has a problem with a lot of people, but out of all the names on that list, Riggs still stands out. The fights, the hospital brawl, the stubborn silence unknown of it ever got a clean ending. If you're a Diaz fan or just love a wild MMA story, hit subscribe and let us know which rivalry should be next. There's always more where that came from.